I'm working this week purely from imagination. I say purely from imagination. There's usually an element of something there in the first place, I suppose. Perhaps there's a really distant memory, a holiday destination I've been to. It'll be based on, when I'm working from imagination like this, it's usually based on an idea of what I think I've seen somewhere. So I'm just going to go straight at this one. I'm using a hog hair brush, which is not a typical watercolor brush, you know, not considered to be your normal sort of watercolor brush, but I like it for this fast, expressive painting from imagination approach. So I pick up some water. I'm going to start up here with some, let's have, again, my colors, as already mentioned, I just think sort of Mediterranean, transparent, cool blues, but I'm not precious. I've got a little bit of phthalo blue, sorry, up here in the sky. Now, I have this idea that it's sort of shacks and perhaps little properties near the water's edge. So I'll come down to about here, maybe a bit strong, so what I'll do is I'll just flood it with water, and I'll purposely create areas of pockets where I know I'll get sort of like cauliflower runbacks, and those will serve as my, perhaps as my, some of my trees. You know, these Mediterranean scenes, they have a lot of these low, sort of small trees. I call them sort of small trees, large bushes. They sort of sometimes resemble olive bushes, that type of thing. But you can see I've just run a very watery mix of ultramarine blue and phthalo blue here, down to this sort of, this is how I'd like to see my edge. You imagine an elevated area here of this little cluster of a village, and I think I'll put this down now, and I'll pick up a round brush, and this is just a synthetic size 10 round brush, and I'll introduce what might be some sunlit trees. I'm picking up a colour here called Aureolin, which is a fantastic transparent greeny yellow. It's a yellow with a lot of green in it, and the reason why I prefer Aureolin in these situations is because although it looks similar to say something like lemon yellow of course is an opaque yellow, and I want to keep as much transparency to my colours as possible. So I'm just thinking out now where this might be a good area to suggest some trees and shapes. Now I've also got I want some buildings, some typical little Mediterranean villas. Perhaps they're fishermen's cottages, fishermen's villas. That's a roof, that's another little villa, maybe just popping through there somewhere. It really is sort of painting by the seat of your pants, making it up as you go along. But the worst thing you can do, and I think I'm borderline doing it now as I speak, is overthinking it. So if I just make more random shapes like this, pushing the brush in quite aggressively into the paper, into the surface of the paper here, and then occasionally making good some shapes as though these are the tops of these little properties. So you need to leave. I need to be leaving little geometrical shapes if those are roos. You know, these will be hard edge square rectangles. Perhaps something like that. Just lots of greenery around here. So I just warmed up that. I was using Aureolin yellow to start off with. Then I added a little bit of raw sienna in places, just for a bit of extra warmth. The raw sienna being warmer than the Aureolin yellow. So I'm playing off warm yellows with cool yellows. Now then, where will the water's edge be? Somewhere around here, I'd say. So up to the water's edge we would expect perhaps a lot of vegetation. Now imagine this being a sort of inlet. A little inlet, a little quiet, peaceful inlet where, as they say, when the fishermen weren't out at sea, they came back to their homes with their catch. Nice protected little sort of area of water's edge back here. And how about if we get some nice tropical blues? Let's get that phthalo blue going again here. So pick up some phthalo blue and let's have a splash of colour about here. And into here maybe. I absolutely love painting like this. It's just so liberating. There are no rules whatsoever. If there's a rule at all, it's just that you're just trying to be mindful of what you're painting is to resemble something. So it's not abstract per se. I suppose it falls in nearer the sort of semi-abstract, category. Sometimes just dropping water in, that creates a nice airy effect. Just pure water. This is all still very wet in wet, as I'm sure you can probably see. And we'll have perhaps a cool red. I'll just introduce a little bit of purple. So if I pick up a little bit of alizarin crimson and drop a little bit of alizarin crimson into the ultramarine blue, and just dot a couple of these slightly darker shapes here and there. This. Let's do something else with the water. This is just water in the brush at the moment. I like to leave a little edge somewhere where it's just white paint, just above where I'm running that brush back and forth. I'll leave that sense of an edge running through there. And if I want to get it back, if I want to cut that edge back out, what I do is I squeeze everything out of this flat brush and make it like a spade, like a splayed edge like that. It's flat, and that's thirsty because there's no paint or water in it, and that allows me just to sort of lift a water edge line out just here and there. A sort of soft reflection on the water in places. So let's, with just picking up water now and helping these deliveries that I made earlier, it's just a delivery of that blue paint that I don't leave too long to move around. So I deliver the paint, let it sit there, let it allow it the time to go into the paper, because what happens is because of the thing they use on manufacturing of paper size, of course the paint and the water doesn't want to go immediately into the paper. It sits on the surface until it breaks through, sort of thing. So if you go trying to move those shapes around or adjust the edges of those shapes too early, you end up with problems. So the best thing you can do is just deliver some paint there, do something else for half a minute. It can be very quick depending on the temperature of the room that you're working in, or it can be very slow if you're working in cooler climates. So just be mindful, you need to sort of try and catch watercolor is all about timing and paint water consistency, and timing's one thing of knowing when to go in, your window of opportunity to do the things you need to do, such as soften edges, lift out, add more paint, work wet into wet, wet into damp. But consistency is tricky because not only do you have to consider how much paint and water the brush needs to be carrying, it's where that brush then makes contact. If it makes contact over here that I can see is still wet, that'll have a different effect than if I made contact over here where it was dry. So not only is it a case of getting the brush loaded correctly, that brush has got to match the consistency or dampness that's already on your paper. So otherwise, you know, you'll end up with something you don't want. You'll always end up with something usable, but it's a case of doing things, being able to predict what it's going to do by knowing the consistency of the paint and the paint and water mix in the brush and on the paper at the same time. If I want some additional little shapes here, I'll just take a painting palette knife and scrape a couple more roofs through. Maybe even just the odd line here. There could be, you know, just a path down to the water's edge somewhere with some railings on it, something like that. So just a little bit of scrape. Again, this is a timing thing. You won't be able to scrape into an area that's gone too dry. You won't make a mark there. And conversely, if you choose an area, I can see a really wet area there because there's a trough in my paper. If you go into there trying to make a mark, it'll just bruise the paper because it's too wet. So now that I've got a general sort of feel for my shapes, I'm going to speed dry this. Okay, and I think if we infer a little bit of a mountain behind, a mountainous region behind here, we'll be able to show off some of these shapes much better. So I'm going to turn to a 1-inch flat brush. I'm picking up some cerulean blue on this occasion, perhaps a little bit of cobalt blue as well. I'll make it quite weak to start off with. I can always strengthen it afterwards. And I'm going to make this sort of backdrop area. Fancy a little bit of green in there. I'm just picking up a little bit of phthalo green. It'll be a bit quick. I don't want to let that hard edge grab a hold. But once I've made the top mountain edge like this against the skyline, I need to bring my attention rather down to what's happening over the tops of this little village. So what I'm thinking about now is the edge that I'm making here that I'm pointing to. Think along the lines of trees, like this. And I'll have to probably soften some of these edges in a moment. So let me just get that shape in roughly like that. And now with this brush, with some water in it, a little bit of water in it, not much, no paint, I'm just going to land the brush here on the immediate area, not in the wet paint that I just applied, and just tease into some of those edges to make them more natural. So it gives a nice soft, imagine strong sunlight perhaps radiating the colour off these shapes so they won't be too hard of edge. There we are. Now I'll speed dry this again. Start inferring, I'll take some ultramarine blue show you the palette here. I'll take some ultramarine blue, some burnt sienna, perhaps a little phthalo blue, and I'll start digging in for some suggested detail. I'm thinking of the front elevations of these little villas that we can see. Little roof line here and there, suggestion of a window, and you know, they're very abstract little sort of shapes. It's just an inference more than anything else of something around these properties. You know, there's no need to say exactly what they are. The sort of brush mark that you make will hopefully suggest something to you when you're actually doing these things. You got to sort of put yourself there as though you're really there in this place, wherever it is, wherever it might be. Just the odd couple of windows like that will just be enough information to say that this is a building. And down at the water's edge, sometimes get away with a little boat, suggestion of a little boat down here. A sort of mooring area. So this is very dry brush. I'm using just about making contact with the surface of the paper, with a mix that's got a lot of paint in it but not that much water. Often for these pure imagination sessions, it can be a little detrimental to plan, because as soon as you make a plan, your brain thinks you must be, you know, it goes into that tight mode, that you paint tight because you have a plan and you've got to stick to the plan. The brain goes into tight mode. So as often as you can, try to paint. I didn't draw, if you remember. I didn't draw this out. So as often as you can, paint as freely as possible, without plans, without drawings. Location posts to this little village in places here. Maybe some other line work required. Zigzagging down through the greenery down here. There's a mooring posts. They say you've got to sort of put yourself there as though you're really there. And we're very nearly where I want it to be, I think. You know, it's a colour combination thing that I've gone for here. We know that the colour orange is always going to work well in a painting where there's a lot of blue, because of course they are they're complementaries. And so it's going to work. You know that it's going to work. There's a lot of bluey greens, so oranges and red oranges are always going to work. Those colours are always going to work. Okay, I'm going to speed dry this now and just put a final sort of hint of shadow across here, and we'll be done. So for this shadow, I'm just going to mix up. I'm going to use the 1-inch flat brush, ultramarine blue, bit of phthalo blue, and a little bit of alizarin crimson. Pretty weird. I don't want too strong a shadow on this. I'll have my usual trusty tissue. Actually, I need a clean one. So I'll take a couple of pieces of tissue. Make a nice little clean pad, which is my eraser. If I put a shadow down that I don't like, I can simply take it straight back off. Now then, imagining the sunshine is coming from upper right, so perhaps this shadow area plays around over the ground like this. I'll have another brush at my disposal in a moment, because I'll need to just soften some of those. So that here's my round brush back with a little bit of water left in it, and I'll just have a go at some of those edges that I feel are too harsh. And this, and perhaps these down here are out of the direct sunshine, off the back end of these properties here, a little bit of shadow. Down here, again, just picking up my other brush, softening out anything I feel is too harsh. Tend to sort of vignette my paintings. In other words, if this is my focal point territory up here mostly, then a lot of the edges that you just saw me doing down here and over here will be softened out so as not to sort of steal the limelight from this area. So let's have a little cast shadow over some of these, and over that one maybe. You know, just a few sort of those wispier clouds up there in this lovely Mediterranean sky that will just throw the odd random shadow into places. But more importantly, it allows you to be more artistic, using those sort of ideas that there are clouds up there helping you out, helping you produce something a little more interesting in your painting. So I usually drop a little bit of warmth somewhere into my shadows while it's still wet. Which means I'll lose a little bit of this, but I'm prepared to forfeit that for a bit of extra effect. So there's a little bit of water in this brush. It's very important that when you're doing this, when you're dragging this down like this for your reflections, to keep the brush moving very vertically. You can't afford to go off at a slight angle. Even a slight angle will spoil it. So just hold your breath, hold the 1-inch flat brush there and pull down as vertically as you possibly can. It gives a great effect for calm inland water. Okay, we'll just finish this off. Right, let's put the mount around it. And there we have it. The odd little white shape up here we could turn into a seagull, maybe a bird down here on the near the water's edge, or near the flying over the water. Just adds a little bit of life, extra interest to it. There we are. My painting from imagination.